These constitutions and governments will last just as long as the bayonets which ushered them into being shall keep them in existence, and not one day longer.
Although Reconstruction forced many changes on the South, it was clear by the early 1870s that fundamentally the South had not been transformed. Slavery was outlawed, but Southerners found myriad ways to prevent blacks from gaining equality and to keep them in conditions as close to slavery as legally possible. Northerners, preoccupied with their own problems and frustrated with the intransigence of Southern whites, began to lose their resolve to pursue Reconstruction.
Why did they give up? The fact of the matter is that the project proved to be very difficult to implement. This is, after all, a federal system. We can't run South Carolina for the next 10 years. At least we can't after 1868, because we've given them sort of self-government in the Reconstruction Act by setting up those new governments and readmitting them to Congress. So we either go in further and get in deeper, maybe, or else we begin to withdraw.
Northerners, Republicans, and white Northerners in general were faced with a population, a white population in the South, that was militantly hostile to many of the things that the North was committed to. And it was intractable.
In addition, Northern racism began to reassert itself. When Southern blacks failed to live up to their expectations, many whites became willing to abandon them to their fate.
What the abolitionists wanted was, of course, hardworking 9-to-5 workers. What African Americans wanted was complete autonomy from whites and land. And it was hard to reconcile these two different interests.
Meanwhile, election results across the South in the mid-1870s showed the campaign of violence and coercion to be effective. In Edgefield County, South Carolina, armed whites turned an estimated 1,000 blacks away from the polls and voted repeatedly themselves. And in Yazoo County, Mississippi, where the number of Republican votes cast in the previous election had been 2,500, there were only 7 recorded votes for the Republican ticket.
They said they were going to beat us at this election. They said that at the meetings and on the stumps and at the schoolhouses around the country. They said they would carry the county or they would kill every nigger. They would carry it if they had to wade in blood.
The line separating whites and blacks had been drawn very starkly in politics, so that any white who chose to be affiliated with the Republican Party was essentially, in the eyes of most white Southerners, committing treason to his race. And then finally, if you add on that the fact that white Democrats could use and did use violence as an extension of politics, it was easy to see why they were able to sweep Republicans out of power by 1876.
Democratic victories across the South in the mid-1870s brought ex-Confederates, former slave owners, and rebel military leaders back into power. These were known as the Redeemers.
Redemption is, I think, a very telling word because it speaks to the idea of redeeming the South from the tawdry experience of Reconstruction. It's the idea of almost cleansing the South, literally, spiritually, as well as politically. And for white Southerners, redemption, of course, is the moment, a time, when white Southerners regained control over life in the South.
By 1877, Reconstruction had ended. Most African Americans who had risen to prominence during the years of radical Reconstruction found themselves once again on the outside looking in. Prince Rivers spent the last years of his life as a coachman, the same position he had occupied under slavery.
The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery.
A few succeeded in other fields. Richard Kane became president of Paul Quinn College in Waco, Texas, and then a bishop in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Robert Smalls, the slave who had made a daring escape from Charleston Harbor during the war, served in South Carolina's Congress until 1887, and then became a customs inspector. Others moved to the north or west, went into business or farming, or immigrated to Africa. But most Southern blacks did what they had always done, worked on the land or at menial jobs, eking out a meager existence in a society that gave them few options. Almost another century would pass before African Americans would regain the rights they had enjoyed for a few years after the Civil War.